All right, hi guys. Today we are doing 2.2 adding and subtracting rational numbers. So there's a lot that goes into today's lesson. First, you need to be able to state the addition rules for integers, which is what we did in chapter 1. Then you need to use decimal and fraction rules to add the rational numbers. Once we get through those two, then we'll move on to stating subtraction rules for integers. Again, we learned this in chapter 1. Then using decimal and fraction rules to subtract rational numbers. So this was your warm-up problems. There were 3 different ones, all of which are review. This first one here was review from chapter 1. And these other 2 over here are review from 5th grade. So let's go ahead and go over these guys. So first we have -4 plus 8. Remember that when we have adding rules, our rule is same signs add and keep, different signs we subtract. So we have different signs here. We're actually going to subtract the digits 8 and 4. So the difference of 8 and 4 is really 4. Then it says keep the sign of the higher number. So when I look at 4 and 8, 8 is a higher number, so we're going to make this a positive 4. Then we move on to our adding fractions problem here. The first thing you have to have when adding fractions is a common denominator. So the common denominator between 3 and 6 is going to be 6. And I did that by timesing the 3 by 2, which means I need to times my numerator by 2 as well. 1 times 2 gives me a numerator of 2. I didn't do anything to my 6. I guess I could say I times it by 1. So times my numerator by 1 to give me 5. Then remember, when adding fractions, we add our numerators together. 2 plus 5 is 7. We keep our denominator the same, which is 6. And then, of course, we have to simplify here. 6 goes into 7 one time with 1 left over. So 1 and 1/6. Okay, over to the right, we have adding decimals. The biggest thing here, remember, is to add or to line up our decimals. So we have 3.24 plus, oops, made that plus a little too close, plus 92.7. So I'm going to start with my decimal and then I'm going to fill in my 92 to make sure I had enough room there to add. 4 plus nothing gives me 4. 2 plus 7 gives me 9. I bring my decimal straight down. 3 plus 2 is 5. Nothing plus 9 is 9. 95.94. Again, lining up those decimals. So a couple of reminders here. For adding, we need to line up our decimals. Oops, not lime. Line up our decimals. Then for fractions, we need a common denominator. And then for our first one here, it's just our rule. Same signs add, different signs subtract. These 3 things are going to come into play today because basically we're taking our integers rules here and we're combining them with our fraction rules and our decimal rules. So again, it's important that we know how to add positive fractions because today we're going to be adding negative fractions. Same thing with negative decimals. So let's go ahead and look at an example here. We have -3.5 plus 4.6. First, I need to figure out what's the rule. Well, here the rule is for adding negative and positive numbers. same signs, add and keep, different signs, subtract. So I have different signs here, so I can tell that I am really going to subtract here. In this situation, I'm going to subtract because I have different signs. So I'm going to take my bigger number, 4.6, and I'm going to subtract 3.5. So I'm ignoring my signs now because now I'm just looking at the digits. I have different signs, so now I can look at my digits and subtract them. 6 minus 5 is 1. 4 minus 3 is 1. And I bring my decimal right down. Now I have solved it. Now I can check the sign. Remember the rule. Same signs add and keep, different signs subtract. Keep the sign of the higher number. Well, 4.6 is higher than 3.5, and 4.6 was positive. So my answer here is just going to be a positive, and you could throw on a positive number there if you would like. So really, you've got to break it down. There's kind of a lot to the problem. You have to think, what was the rule? So am I actually adding or am I subtracting these digits? Solve it, and last but not least, always double check your sign. Is this going to be a positive answer or a negative answer? So you are going to try this one here, negative 7.8 plus negative 4.5. We'll pause the video while you try it in your notebook. All right, so let's go ahead and check that answer. So I have the same signs, so I'm actually going to add my two digits together to get the digits 12.3, and I'm going to keep the sign. Same signs, add and keep. So if they were both negative, my answer is negative as well, negative 12.3. Okay, now I'm moving on to an example with fractions. So I always start with what's the rule? Well, adding the rule is same signs, add and keep, different signs, subtract. So I need to decide, am I going to add or am I going to subtract them? Well, I have the same signs, so I'm really going to add my fractions here because, again, they are the same signs. So now I'm just looking at the fractions. I need a common denominator. I always need a common denominator. So when I look at these two fractions, well, I don't always. When I'm adding or subtracting, I need a common denominator. Looking at these two fractions, I can see a common denominator here would be 12. Well, to get from 3 to 12, I multiplied by 4, so I've got to do that to the top as well, giving me negative 8 on the top. Here I just times it by 1, so I'm just going to times it by 1 again, giving me negative 5. With fractions, all we do is keep the same bottom, so my bottom is going to be 12. And now I can look up at the top, and my new problem is just negative 8 plus negative 5. I know that. Okay, negative 8 plus negative 5 is something we did in chapter 1, and that's going to give us a negative 13. So negative 13/12 simplifies down to negative 1 and 1/12. Don't lose your negative along the way. What I like to do with fractions, if there's any type of adding or subtracting, I really like to get myself that common denominator before I do anything else. Then I can look at my numerators for my signs. So here I have the same signs, so I added and I kept the negative. So I think that's a great way to deal with fractions, adding and subtracting them. Find the common denominator and then deal with, am I adding or subtracting these digits? Because then you just look at the numerators and you can kind of treat the numerators like whole numbers once you've found that common denominator. So again, find your common denominator, then deal with the negatives and positives on the numerators. Go ahead and you try this one, common denominators, and then deal with your signs. Try it in your notebook. We'll pause the video. All right, let's go ahead and check the answers to these. So my common denominator I used was 24. I had different signs, so I really subtracted 20 minus 9, giving me 11/24. Another way you could have thought about this was saying negative 20/24 plus positive 9/24. I knew 24 was going to be my denominator, so I just looked up here. Negative 20 plus 9, which is really the difference of 20 and 9. Keep the sign of the higher number, and the higher number was 20 in this case, so negative 11/24. Again, I like to find those common denominators first and then just go across the top with it, kind of treating them like whole numbers. Negative 20 plus 9. Okay, what I want you to do now is you are going to try both of these in your notebook, and we're going to evaluate how are you doing. So try both the decimal problem and the fraction problem. I did give you a little hint here. Remember, when you're dealing with fractions and mixed numbers, change them all to impropers and then deal with your problem. All right, let's check your answer. So here are our two answers. Negative 2 3/4 plus 3/4. For my fraction for this one, I did negative 33/12 plus negative 11/12. Then I added my numerators and carried over my denominator and simplified. For my decimals up here, I had different signs, so I really subtracted 8.1 minus 7.92, lining up my decimals. Okay, now we're going to move on to subtracting. I want to point out that this is review here. Negative 4 minus 8, subtracting fractions and subtracting decimals. Go ahead and try these three in your notebook. They are review at this point. Okay, so negative 4 minus 8. Remember, when we're subtracting integers, we KFC our integers first. So really, this is negative 4 plus negative 8. Same signs, add and keep. So I have the same signs, 12, and I keep the negative in front. With subtracting integers, it's just like adding. We need a common denominator. I'm going to use a common denominator here of 6. If I grew this to 6, I need to grow my numerator by 2 as well to give me 4. I grew this one by 3. Got to grow my numerator by 3 as well to give me 3 at the top. Now I can subtract my numerators to give me 1. Keep my denominator 1/6. All right, we're moving on to subtracting integers. Same thing as before, make sure that we line up, or subtracting decimals, line up those decimals. I'm going to add a 0 there just so that they're even in length. I'm going to have to borrow from my 7, so my 7 becomes a 6. And this guy becomes a 10. 10 minus 3 is 7. 6 minus 2 is 4. 8 minus 4 is 4, giving me the answer of 4.47. So very, very similar to adding. We need to line up our decimals. We need a common denominator. And then, of course, with integers, we actually KFC it. So let's go ahead and look at a decimal problem with integers. First, we need to figure out what's the rule. Well, I'm subtracting. So my rule is I need to KFC my problem. So really I have negative 3.5 plus, change that positive to a negative, negative 5.6. Now I can decide, am I going to add or subtract? Well, I have the same signs here, same signs, add and keep. So I'm really going to add these two digits together. So 3.5 plus 5.6. Remembering to line up our decimals. I have an 11, carry the 1, bring my decimal down. 1 plus 3 plus 5 is 9. So I have 9.1. And then the last thing here is to check the sign. Well, I had the same sign, so I added and I keep the negative number. So really what we're doing here, guys, is we are taking our integer rules and our decimal rules and adding them together. So we had to KFC our problem, and then it was really like an adding problem we just did in the slides above. Just don't forget, when you have subtraction, you KFC first. Let's go ahead and you try this one. Negative 1.4 minus negative 9.5. What's the rule? Then figure out, do I really add or do I subtract these? Do that, and then check our sign. Go ahead and try it in your notebook. I'll pause the video. All right. Here's our answer for this you try. First, we KFC'd it. So my problem was really negative 1.4 plus positive 9.5. I have different signs here. I have a positive and I have a negative. So I really am going to subtract those digits. 9.5 minus 1.4 gives me the digits 8.1. And then I keep the sign of the higher number. And the higher number in this case was 9.5. So my answer is positive. You can see my different steps as I worked down here. Let's go ahead and try one with fractions. We have negative 3/4 minus 7/20. So first we need to figure out what's the rule. Well, we're going to KFC this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to KFC it, and I'm going to find common denominators at the same time, because I know when I'm adding or subtracting fractions, I have to have common denominators. So my common denominator here I can see is going to be 20. And I need to KFC this. So negative, change this to a addition. And this was a negative or a positive 7/20. So I'm going to change it to a negative 7/20. Now I can see my numerators here. How did I get from 20 to 20? Well, I just times it by 1. So I got to times my numerator by 1 as well, giving me 7/20. Here, I times this guy by 5, so I need to times my numerator by 5 as well to give me 15. So I know my numerator is going to be 20 no matter what I do, because remember, we just drag our common denominator over. So now I can really look at the problem. Negative 15 plus negative 7. So I found my common denominator. I'm done with my denominator. Now I'm just looking at whole numbers, really. I can treat my numerator as like whole numbers. Negative 15 plus negative 7. Same signs, add and keep. So I'm going to add those digits because they're the same signs, giving me 23, or 22, 22. And I need to decide, is this a negative or a positive? Same signs, add and keep. I'm going to keep the negative. Negative 22 over 20, that can be simplified to negative 1 and 2/20, which can be simplified even more to negative 1 and 1/10. So again, finding those common denominators, it was a subtraction problem, so I KFC'd right from the bat. And if you need to do the KFC and the common denominators in two different steps, do that. I just combined them in steps because I knew I was changing my problem either way. But again, two different steps works as well. Carry my denominator over and then really look at my numerator. What do I got going on in my numerator? Go ahead and you try this one. Don't forget to KFC and find common denominators. I'll pause the video. All right, let's go ahead and check that answer. So here's our answer for this one. First, I KFC'd them. So 7/2 minus a negative. I kept the 7/2, flipped the subtraction to addition, and changed my -1/9 to a +1/9. And I just had a normal adding problem, so I found common denominators, added my numerators together to get 65/18, and simplified down to 3 and 11/18. Okay. So we've got two triads of your own for these as well. We've got one subtraction and one decimal and one fraction. Remember with the fractions, find common denominators with both of these. KFC are subtraction problems. Try it in your notebook. I'll pause the video. All right, let's check our answers for that one. So when I KFC'd this decimal problem here, I really had 8.54 plus, and I changed this to a positive, 3.43. Lined up my decimals, added them, and they're both positive, so my answer is positive. With my fraction one here, I KFC'd, but I also found a common denominator of 6. So KFC'd, that changed to a positive, found common denominators of 6. So I really had -3 plus 4. -3 plus 4 is a +1 over my denominator of 6. All right, so we're going to do some practice if we have time on adding and subtracting rational numbers.